In the year 2378, humanity had spread across the stars. They lived on planets far from Earth, building colonies and trying to make new homes among the stars. One of these colonies was called Elysium Prime, a place with green fields, tall mountains, and cities that sparkled under two suns. It was peaceful, or at least it seemed that way. But peace can be fragile when danger is lurking just beyond the horizon. Ethan Carter stood on the edge of Fort Nova, a military base built to protect Elysium Prime. He was in his late 30s, with short brown hair and a face marked by years of hard decisions. His uniform was clean but worn, showing the signs of countless patrols. Ethan looked out at the vast expanse of space through a large window. The stars twinkled like tiny diamonds scattered across black velvet. Somewhere out there, trouble was brewing. For weeks, rumors had been spreading about something called the Swarm. No one knew exactly what it was, but reports said it was an enemy unlike anything humanity had ever faced. Ships had gone missing near the outer edges of human territory. Colonists on distant moons spoke of strange lights in the sky and eerie sounds coming from the darkness. The Galactic Council, the group of advanced alien species who kept order in the galaxy, had issued strict orders. Humans were not allowed to fight. They were not even allowed to defend themselves if attacked. The Council believed that humans were too aggressive, too quick to use violence. To them, war was not the answer. Ethereal as the night sky outside, Laura Bennett entered the room. She was Ethan's wife, a scientist who studied alien life forms. Her blonde hair was tied back, and her blue eyes carried both curiosity and worry. She held a tablet in her hand, its screen glowing softly. "Ethan," she said, her voice calm but firm, "you've heard the latest updates, haven't you?" Ethan nodded. "Yeah, I've heard. The Council says we're supposed to sit here and do nothing while this thing gets closer." His tone was bitter, frustration evident in every word. "How are we supposed to protect our people if we can't even raise a weapon?" Laura sighed. She understood his anger, but she also knew how dangerous the Swarm could be. "The Council isn't wrong to be cautious," she said. "Every civilization that's tried to fight the Swarm has been destroyed. Or worse, we don't know enough about them yet." "But what happens when they get here?" Ethan asked, turning to face her. "What happens when they start attacking our colonies? Are we just supposed to let them take us apart piece by piece?" Before Laura could respond, an alarm blared through the base. Red lights flashed, and soldiers rushed to their stations. Ethan grabbed his helmet and ran toward the command center. On the main screen, a live feed showed a small, insect-like ship hovering near the edge of Elysium Prime's solar system. It wasn't human-made, and it certainly wasn't friendly. "This is it," one of the officers said nervously. "They're here." Ethan clenched his fists. Orders from the Council or not, he couldn't stand by and wait for disaster to strike. He made a decision then and there. Ignoring protocol, he gathered a team of pilots and prepared a squadron of fighters. They would investigate the ship, gather intelligence, and, if necessary, defend their colony. As he climbed into his cockpit, Laura's voice echoed in his mind. "We don't know enough about them yet." But waiting wasn't an option anymore. Not for Ethan. Not for anyone on Elysium Prime. Whatever the Swarm was, it was coming, and humanity would have to decide how to face it. Ethan Carter led his squadron of fighters into the cold emptiness of space. The small insect-like ship that had appeared near Elysium Prime's solar system was still there, hovering silently as if waiting for something. Ethan's heart raced as he gripped the controls of his fighter. He knew this mission was risky, maybe even foolish, but he couldn't just sit back and do nothing. Behind him, his team followed in tight formation, their ships glinting faintly in the light of the distant stars. As they approached the alien vessel, it became clear that it wasn't alone. Dozens of smaller drones surrounded it, moving in perfect synchronization like a swarm of bees. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. These weren't ordinary machines. They moved with purpose, almost alive. "Stay sharp," he said over the comms, his voice steady despite the tension. We don't know what we're dealing with." The squadron split up to surround the alien craft. Ethan signaled for his team to hold their fire. They needed to gather information first. One of the drones suddenly darted toward them, its metallic surface shimmering in the starlight. Ethan's instincts kicked in, and he maneuvered his ship to intercept it. A burst of energy shot out from the drone, narrowly missing his wing. "They're hostile," he shouted. "Engage." The battle erupted quickly. Lasers flashed across the void as Ethan and his team fought back against the drones. Their movements were precise, years of training guiding their actions. But the drones seemed endless, appearing faster than the humans could destroy them. Despite the odds, Ethan managed to disable one of the drones with a well-placed shot. It spun out of control and crashed into an asteroid nearby. "Retrieve it," Ethan ordered. If they could bring back even part of the enemy's technology, it might give them answers. Two pilots broke away from the fight to collect the wreckage while Ethan and the others continued to hold off the remaining drones. The skirmish was intense, but after several minutes, the alien craft suddenly retreated, disappearing into the darkness of space as quickly as it had come. Back at Fort Nova, Laura Bennett waited anxiously for news. When Ethan returned, his face was grim but determined. "We got something," he told her, handing over a piece of the damaged drone. Laura immediately began examining it in the lab. Her hands moved swiftly as she connected wires and scanned the device with specialized equipment. Hours passed before she finally looked up, her expression troubled. "This isn't just a machine," she said softly. "It's biological. Part of it is made from living tissue." She showed Ethan images on her screen, strange patterns and structures that resembled both circuits and organic cells. "And there's more. Look here." She pointed to a section of data embedded in the drone's memory. "These symbols match records I've seen before, in ancient ruins on other planets. Civilizations that vanished without explanation." Ethan frowned. "You think the swarm is connected to those disappearances?" "It's possible," Laura replied. "Whoever, or whatever, the swarm is, they'd been doing this for a long time. And they don't stop until everything is gone." Word of Ethan's unauthorized mission reached the Galactic Council faster than he expected. Within hours, a sleek silver ship descended onto Elysium Prime, carrying Ambassador Kale, a representative of the Council. Kale was tall and imposing, with pale blue skin and piercing eyes that seemed to see right through people. He wasted no time confronting Ethan. "You disobeyed direct orders," Kale said, his tone icy. "Humans are forbidden from engaging in warfare. Your reckless actions endanger not only your colony but the entire galaxy." Ethan met his gaze without flinching. "If we hadn't acted, who knows what would have happened? That thing wasn't here to negotiate. It was probing us, testing our defenses. We can't just sit around and wait for them to attack." Cal's expression didn't change. "Your species has a history of aggression. Every time you fight, you escalate conflicts beyond control. That is why you are banned from war. The swarm does not respond to violence. It consumes it." Despite Cal's words, Ethan refused to back down. Whatever the swarm was, humanity couldn't afford to be passive, not when so much was at stake. As Kale left to report back to the Council, Ethan turned to Laura. "We need to figure out what's really going on," he said, "before it's too late." Laura nodded, determination in her eyes. Together, they began digging deeper into the secrets hidden within the drone's data. Somewhere in that tangled web of information lay answers, and perhaps a way to save humanity from the growing threat in the stars. The days following Ambassador Kale's visit were tense. The Galactic Council's presence loomed over Elysium Prime like a storm cloud, heavy and unyielding. Ethan Carter found himself caught between two forces: the Council's strict rules and his duty to protect his people. He spent most of his time in Fort Nova's command center, poring over reports and strategizing with his team. Laura worked tirelessly in the lab, trying to uncover more secrets from the damaged drone they had recovered. Despite the pressure, neither of them could afford to slow down. Time was running out. Ambassador Kale hadn't left Elysium Prime after his initial meeting with Ethan. Instead, he set up a temporary office in the colony's capital city, keeping a close eye on human activities. His silver ship remained parked near the edge of the settlement, a constant reminder of the Council's authority. Every few hours, Kale would send updates back to the Council, detailing Ethan's actions and warning of humanity's reckless tendencies. Ethan knew it was only a matter of time before the Council decided to take stronger measures against him, and possibly the entire colony. One evening, as Ethan walked through the base, he noticed Laura sitting at a table in the mess hall. Her face was pale, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. She looked exhausted. "You need to rest," Ethan said gently, sitting down across from her. "I can't," she replied, pushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "There's too much to do. I've been going through the drone's databanks again, and I think I found something important." She slid a tablet toward him. On the screen was a series of fragmented images, strange landscapes, alien structures, and what looked like battlefields littered with wreckage. "What am I looking at?" Ethan asked, squinting at the blurry pictures. "These are records from other civilizations," Laura explained. "Civilizations that fought the swarm and lost. Every single one of them tried to resist, just like we're thinking of doing now. And every single one of them was destroyed." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. So the Council was right. Fighting is hopeless. "Not necessarily," Laura said quickly. "There's more. Buried deep in the data, there's mention of a weapon. Something created by an ancient race before they were assimilated into the swarm. If we can find it, or recreate it, it might give us a chance." Ethan leaned back in his chair, processing what she'd said. A weapon. That was a long shot, but it was better than nothing. Still, the idea of defying the Council even further weighed heavily on him. "If we go after this, we'll be crossing a line we can't come back from," he said quietly. Laura nodded. "I know. But if we don't try, what happens when the swarm comes for us? What happens to Mia?" She glanced toward the corner of the room, where a young girl sat coloring with crayons. Mia had been staying at the base since her rescue, and both Ethan and Laura had grown protective of her. She represented everything they were fighting for, the future of humanity. Before Ethan could respond, an alert sounded throughout the base. A message from Ambassador Kale appeared on the main screen. "Report to the Council Envoy immediately." Ethan exchanged a worried look with Laura. This couldn't be good. When Ethan arrived at Kale's office, the ambassador was waiting for him, flanked by 2 Council envoys. Their expressions were grim. "Commander Carter," Kale began, his voice cold and measured, "your continued defiance of Council orders has forced us to reconsider our stance on Elysium Prime. We cannot allow your colony to act independently any longer." "What does that mean?" Ethan asked, though he already feared the answer. "It means," Kale said, stepping closer, "that unless you comply fully with our directives, we will impose sanctions. No trade, no resources, no support. Your colony will be isolated." Ethan clenched his fists but kept his voice steady. "And if the swarm attacks, will you stand by and watch us die?" Kale's gaze hardened. "We have seen countless species fall to the swarm because they chose violence over survival. Do not make the same mistake." As Ethan left the meeting, frustration burned in his chest. The Council's hands-off approach felt like abandonment. But he also knew that defying them completely would leave Elysium Prime vulnerable. He needed allies, people who believed in humanity's potential to fight back. As he walked back to the base, he made a decision. It was time to assemble a team willing to operate outside the Council's rules. If humanity was going to survive, they would have to take matters into their own hands. Ethan Carter returned to Fort Nova with a plan forming in his mind. The Council's threats had made one thing clear. Humanity couldn't rely on anyone but themselves. If they wanted to survive the swarm, they would need to act quickly and quietly. Laura's discovery of the ancient weapon gave them a glimmer of hope, but turning that hope into reality would require more than just the two of them. They needed help, people who were willing to take risks and think outside the rules. The next morning, Ethan gathered a small group of trusted individuals in a secure room deep within the base. Among them were Marcus Hale, a grizzled ex-soldier with a sharp tactical mind, and Rachel Meyer, a brilliant engineer known for her ability to fix anything from starship engines to alien tech. Both had seen enough of the galaxy to know when the odds were stacked against them, but neither was the type to give up easily. "We're going rogue," Ethan began, his voice low but firm. "The Council won't lift a finger to help us, and we can't wait around for the swarm to come knocking." Laura found something in the drone's data, a weapon created by an ancient race before they were wiped out. "If we can figure out how it works, maybe we can turn the tide." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You're talking about building a weapon based on scraps of alien tech. That's not exactly a sure thing." "It's all we got," Ethan replied. "If we don't try, we're sitting ducks. I'm not asking anyone to do this blindly. But if you're willing to stand with me, we might just have a shot." Rachel leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. "What kind of weapon are we talking about here?" "Something big." Laura stepped in, holding up her tablet. On the screen was a schematic, a rough outline of what the weapon might look like. It was sleek and unfamiliar, with components that seemed to blur the line between machine and biology. "We don't have all the details yet," she admitted, "but it looks like it disrupts neural networks. If the swarm really is a hive mind, this could be our best chance to break their control." Marcus let out a low whistle. "Sounds dangerous, and probably illegal." "Everything we're doing is illegal," Ethan said with a grim smile. "But if it keeps Mia and everyone else safe, I'll take that risk." Over the next few days, the group worked tirelessly to piece together the fragments of information hidden in the drone's memory. Laura and Rachel spent hours decoding encrypted files, while Marcus helped Ethan scout potential locations for their operation. They couldn't stay at Fort Nova indefinitely. The Council's envoys were watching too closely. They needed somewhere remote, somewhere no one would think to look. Their search led them to an abandoned asteroid mining station on the outskirts of the Elysium Prime solar system. The facility was old and crumbling, its corridors dark and dusty. But it had everything they needed: power generators, workshops, and enough space to build whatever they came up with. It wasn't perfect, but it would have to do. As they settled into their new base, tensions began to rise. The weight of what they were attempting pressed down on all of them. One night, as Ethan sat alone in the dimly lit control room, Marcus joined him. "You really think we can pull this off?" he asked, handing Ethan a cup of coffee. "I don't know," Ethan admitted, "but I know we can't sit back and do nothing. If we fail, at least we'll have tried." Marcus nodded slowly. "Just so you know, I'm with you until the end, whatever that looks like." Ethan felt a surge of gratitude. He knew they were outnumbered and outgunned, but with people like Marcus and Rachel by his side, he felt a flicker of hope. Together, they might just find a way to fight back against the swarm, even if it meant breaking every rule in the book. The asteroid base was cold and silent, its metal walls echoing with the faint hum of machinery. Ethan Carter stood in the center of the main workshop, staring at the scattered pieces of alien tech spread across a large table. The team had made progress decoding the ancient weapon schematics, but it wasn't enough. They were missing critical components, rare materials that didn't exist on Elysium Prime or any nearby colony. Rachel Meyer tapped her fingers impatiently on the edge of the table as she studied the list of required elements. "We need this stuff," Rachel said, pointing to the screen of her tablet. "And it's not going to be easy to get. Most of these materials are controlled by the Vokar Syndicate." Ethan frowned. The Vokar Syndicate was a ruthless group of mercenaries who operated in uncharted regions of space. They hoarded valuable resources and sold them at exorbitant prices, or worse, used them to fund their own private wars. Dealing with them was dangerous, but there didn't seem to be another option. "Then we'll take it from them," Marcus Hale said bluntly. His arms were crossed, and his weathered face showed no hint of hesitation. "If they're sitting on what we need, we don't have time to negotiate." Laura Bennett looked up from her notes, concern etched on her face. "Stealing from the Vokar Syndicate. That's practically declaring war. What happens if they come after us?" "They won't know it's us," Ethan replied firmly. "We'll go in fast, grab what we need, and get out before they even realize what hit them." Rachel nodded slowly. "It's risky, but doable. I can modify some of our equipment to bypass their security systems. If we disable their sensors long enough, we might pull it off." The plan was set, but executing it wouldn't be easy. The team spent days preparing for the mission, running simulations and practicing every possible scenario. They knew one mistake could mean disaster, not just for them, but for everyone counting on them to stop the swarm. On the day of the raid, the team boarded a small, unmarked transport ship. Ethan piloted the vessel while Marcus manned the weapons console, his eyes scanning the void for any sign of trouble. Laura stayed behind at the asteroid base to monitor their progress remotely, while Rachel focused on disabling the Syndicate's defenses once they arrived. As they approached the Vokar Syndicate's stronghold, a massive fortress carved into an asteroid, it became clear why the group was so feared. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter, and automated turrets lined the outer walls. The facility was a fortress in every sense of the word. "Stay sharp," Ethan said over the comms. "Remember, speed is key. Get in, grab the materials, and get out." Rachel worked quickly, hacking into the Syndicate's network and shutting down sections of their security grid. With her help, the team slipped past the outer defenses undetected. Inside, the air was thick with tension. The corridors were dimly lit, and the sound of their footsteps echoed eerily against the metal floors. They'd reached the storage area where the materials were kept, but their relief was short-lived. Just as Marcus began loading the supplies onto their transport, alarms blared through the facility. Someone had discovered the breach. "Move," Ethan shouted, drawing his sidearm. The team sprinted toward the exit, dodging laser fire from pursuing guards. Marcus took point, firing precise shots to cover their retreat. Despite the chaos, they managed to reach the ship and take off just as reinforcements arrived. Back at the asteroid base, the team celebrated their narrow escape. But the victory was bittersweet. They had what they needed to start building the weapon, but the raid had drawn unwanted attention. Somewhere out there, the Vokar Syndicate was now hunting them. And if they found out who was responsible, humanity's chances of survival would shrink even further. Ethan stared out at the stars, his mind racing. Every step forward seemed to bring new dangers. But as he glanced at Mia playing quietly in the corner, he reminded himself why they were doing this. For her. And for everyone else who deserved a future free from fear. The asteroid base was alive with activity as the team worked around the clock to assemble the ancient weapon. With the materials stolen from the Vokar Syndicate now in their possession, Rachel Meyer took the lead in piecing together the device. Her hands moved quickly, soldering wires and calibrating components that seemed to defy logic. The weapon wasn't just a machine. It was part organic, its alien design pulsing faintly with an eerie light. Ethan Carter watched her work, his arms crossed and his expression tense. Every second mattered, and they all knew it. Laura Bennett sat nearby, poring over the schematics on her tablet. She had been studying the drone's databanks for days, uncovering more details about how the weapon functioned. "It's not enough to just build it," she said, looking up at Ethan. "We need to understand how to use it safely. If we trigger it wrong, it could destroy us along with the swarm." Ethan nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The raid on the Syndicate's stronghold had bought them some breathing room, but it wouldn't last long. Sooner or later, the Vokar would track them down. And when they did, there would be no escaping their wrath. Worse still, Ambassador Kale, and the Galactic Council were growing suspicious of the strange activity around Elysium Prime. If they discovered what the team was doing, humanity's fragile position in the galaxy could collapse entirely. "We're going to need a distraction," Marcus Hale said suddenly, breaking the silence. He leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, and his face grim. "If the Council or the Syndicate finds us here, we're done for. We need to keep them looking somewhere else while we finish this." Ethan turned to him, intrigued. "What do you have in mind?" Marcus smirked. "Fake supply shipments. Send out decoy transports heading toward neutral zones. It'll draw attention away from the base and buy us more time." It was a risky plan, but it was also clever. Ethan agreed, and the team got to work preparing the decoys. They loaded empty crates onto old transport ships and programmed them to follow routes that would lead curious eyes far from the asteroid base. As the ships launched into space, Ethan felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could pull this off. Back in the workshop, progress on the weapon continued. Rachel worked tirelessly, her focus unshakable. By the third day, the prototype was nearly complete. Its sleek alien design hummed softly, as if alive. But something was missing, a final component required to activate the device. When Rachel ran a diagnostic scan, her face fell. "We've got a problem," she said, turning to the group. "The core needs a specific type of energy source, something rare. Without it, the weapon won't work." Ethan clenched his fists. "Where do we find it?" Rachel hesitated before answering. "There's only one place left in this sector where it exists, in territory controlled by rival factions, and getting it won't be easy." Before they could discuss further, alarms blared through the base. Laura rushed to the control panel, her fingers flying over the keys. "Someone's coming," she said, her voice tight with fear. On the screen, several ships were approaching fast, their markings unmistakable. It was the Galactic Council. Ambassador Kell's voice crackled over the comms. "This is your final warning, Commander Carter. Cease all unauthorized activities immediately, or face the consequences." Ethan exchanged a worried glance with Marcus. They had known this moment might come, but they weren't ready for it yet. "Everyone, get to your stations," he ordered. "We're not giving up. Not now." As the Council's ships closed in, Daniel Cross, one of the team members, stepped forward. His face was pale, and his hands trembled slightly. I can't do this anymore," he stammered. Before anyone could stop him, he activated a hidden beacon, signaling their location to the Council. Betrayal hit like a punch to the gut. Ethan stared at Daniel, anger burning in his chest. "Why?" he demanded. "I didn't sign up for this," Daniel shouted back. "I'm not dying for some half-baked plan." Chaos erupted as Council forces stormed the base. Marcus stayed behind, fighting fiercely to hold them off while Ethan, Laura, and Rachel escaped with the prototype. As they fled, Ethan heard the sound of gunfire fade into silence. Marcus had sacrificed himself to give them a chance. On the escaped ship, Ethan looked back at the asteroid base, now swarming with Council envoys. He felt grief and guilt weighing heavily on him, but there was no time to mourn. They had the weapon and a mission to complete. For Marcus, for Mia, and for humanity, they would see it through. The escaped ship carrying Ethan Carter, Laura Bennett, and Rachel Meyer sped through the cold emptiness of space. Behind them, the asteroid base grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared entirely from view. None of them spoke. The weight of Marcus's sacrifice hung heavily in the air, mingling with the fear of what lay ahead. They had barely escaped the Council's forces, but they weren't safe yet. The prototype weapon was their only hope, and they needed to finish it, no matter the cost. Ethan sat at the controls, his jaw tight as he plotted a course toward hostile territory. The energy source required to activate the weapon was located deep in a region controlled by rival factions, dangerous groups who didn't take kindly to intruders. "This won't be easy," Ethan said finally, breaking the silence. His voice was low, strained. "But we don't have a choice. Laura nodded, her face pale but determined. She held Mia close, the young girl sitting quietly in her lap. Since rescuing her, Mia had become a symbol of everything they were fighting for, a future free from the swarm's destruction. "We'll make it work," Laura said softly, though her hands trembled slightly. "We have to." Rachel leaned over her tablet, studying maps of the area they were heading into. "There's an outpost on the edge of the territory," she explained. "It's small, poorly defended. If we move fast, we can grab the energy source without drawing too much attention." The plan was risky, but it was all they had. Hours later, they arrived at the outpost, a cluster of battered buildings surrounded by high walls and armed guards. The team prepared for the mission carefully, knowing one wrong move could mean disaster. Ethan led the way, his movements deliberate as he guided the group toward the storage facility where the energy source was kept. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Shelves lined the walls, filled with crates and supplies. Rachel moved quickly, scanning each container until she found what they needed. "Got it," she whispered, holding up a glowing crystal-like object. Its light pulsed faintly, almost like a heartbeat. But before they could leave, alarms blared through the outpost. Guards rushed in, weapons drawn. Ethan and Rachel covered the exits, firing carefully to hold them off while Laura carried Mia to safety. Bullets ricocheted off the walls, and the sound of shouting filled the air. It was chaos, but they couldn't afford to panic. "Fall back," Ethan shouted, motioning for the others to retreat. They ran through the narrow corridors, dodging enemy fire as explosions rocked the building. Just as they reached the exit, one of the guards lunged at Rachel, knocking her to the ground. Without hesitation, Ethan turned and fired, taking the guard down before helping Rachel up. Outside, the escape ship waited, its engines humming softly. They climbed aboard and took off just as reinforcements arrived, chasing them with blasts of laser fire. Ethan piloted the ship with steady hands, weaving through the barrage until they were clear. Back on board, the group caught their breath. Rachel examined the energy source closely, ensuring it hadn't been damaged during the fight. "This is it," she said, her voice tinged with both relief and awe. "With this, we can finish the weapon." Ethan looked at Mia, who was curled up in Laura's arms, asleep despite the danger they'd just faced. Her innocence reminded him why they were doing this, not just for survival, but for a better tomorrow. "We're not done yet," Ethan said firmly, "but we're closer than ever." Though the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear: humanity's fight against the swarm wasn't over, and neither was theirs. The team gathered in the dimly lit workshop aboard their ship, the stolen energy source glowing faintly on the table. Rachel Meyer worked quickly, her hand steady as she connected the crystal to the prototype weapon. The device hummed softly, its alien design pulsing with an eerie light that seemed almost alive. Ethan Carter watched closely, his arms crossed and his expression tense. They were so close now, close enough to taste victory, but he knew better than to let his guard down. One mistake could cost them everything. Laura Bennett sat nearby, studying the schematics one last time. Her eyes moved rapidly over the screen of her tablet, double-checking every detail. "We're missing something," she said suddenly, her voice sharp with urgency. "The activation sequence. It's not just about powering it up. There's a failsafe." Ethan frowned. "What kind of failsafe?" "It's biological," Laura explained, pointing to a section of the schematic. "The weapon needs someone to interface with it, someone who can sync their neural signals to trigger the disruption field." Rachel stopped what she was doing and turned to face her. "You mean someone has to physically connect to it, like plugging themselves in?" Laura nodded slowly. "Yes, and once they do, there's no guarantee they'll survive." The room fell silent. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. This changed everything. They had risked so much already. Marcus had given his life for this mission, but asking someone to sacrifice themselves to activate the weapon was another level entirely. "I'll do it," Rachel said after a moment, her voice calm but firm. She met Ethan's gaze without flinching. I built this thing. I know how it works. If anyone has a chance of making it work, it's me. No, Ethan said immediately. There has to be another way. There isn't, Rachel replied, her tone leaving no room for argument. We don't have time to find another solution. You know that. Ethan opened his mouth to protest, but Laura cut him off. She's right, she said quietly. If we wait, the swarm will reach us first. We can't afford to hesitate. The decision weighed heavily on all of them, but deep down, Ethan knew they were out of options. He looked at Rachel, searching for any sign of doubt, but her expression was resolute. She had made up her mind. Hours later, the team approached the swarm's stronghold, a massive hive-like structure floating in the void of space. Its surface shimmered with strange patterns, like veins pulsing with energy. The sight sent a shiver through Ethan as he piloted the ship closer. This is it, he said, his voice tight. Once we deploy the weapon, there's no turning back. Rachel nodded, clutching the prototype tightly. Just get me inside. I'll handle the rest. Ethan guided the ship through waves of drones guarding the hive, relying on Rachel's modifications to their shields to deflect enemy fire. The journey was harrowing, but they finally reached a weak point in the structure, an opening large enough for them to slip through. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Strange noises echoed through the corridors, and the walls seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The team moved cautiously, knowing they were surrounded by danger at every turn. When they reached the central chamber, a vast, cavernous space filled with glowing orbs connected by streams of energy, Rachel stepped forward. "This is where I leave you," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. She handed Mia a small stuffed animal she had been carrying. "Take care of her, okay?" Ethan wanted to say something, anything, to stop her, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he simply nodded. Laura hugged Rachel tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. Rachel smiled weakly before turning toward the weapon. She placed it in the center of the chamber and activated it, the device lighting up brighter with each passing second. As the weapon began to hum louder, Rachel connected herself to it, wires snaking around her arms and torso. Her body tensed as the neural link took hold, and then she was gone. The disruption field erupted outward, tearing through the swarm's network. The hive shook violently, its lights flickering and dying. Ethan grabbed Mia and Laura, pulling them toward the exit as alarms blared around them. Behind them, Rachel's voice echoed faintly, one final message before the connection severed completely. "You're welcome." As they escaped into the cold emptiness of space, Ethan looked back at the crumbling hive, grief and gratitude warring in his chest. They had won, but the cost was unimaginable. And as the stars stretched endlessly before them, he vowed to honor Rachel's sacrifice and ensure it wasn't in vain. The ship carrying Ethan Carter, Laura Bennett, and Mia drifted silently through space. The swarm's stronghold was far behind them now, its once imposing structure reduced to rubble. The weapon had worked. Rachel's sacrifice had shattered the hive mind, disrupting the swarm's control over their collective network. But victory felt hollow. The weight of what they had lost pressed down on everyone aboard. Ethan sat in the cockpit, staring out at the endless expanse of stars. His hands rested loosely on the controls, but he wasn't steering toward anything in particular. For the first time in weeks, there was no immediate threat looming over them, no enemy to fight. Yet the silence was deafening. Rachel's voice still echoed in his mind. "You're welcome." Those two words carried so much. Her bravery, her determination, and the price she had paid for humanity's survival. Laura sat in the cabin with Mia, trying to keep the young girl distracted. She read stories aloud from an old book she brought along, her voice soft and soothing. But even as she turned the pages, her thoughts kept drifting back to Rachel. They had all grown close during their time together, bound by shared struggles and impossible choices. Losing her felt like losing a piece of themselves. Mia seemed to sense the sadness hanging over the group. She didn't ask about Rachel or the mission. They hadn't told her the full truth, but she stayed close to Laura, seeking comfort in her presence. At one point, she held up the stuffed animal Rachel had given her and said quietly, "She was nice." Laura hugged her tightly, blinking back tears. "Yes," she whispered. "She was very nice." Hours later, the Galactic Council contacted them. A sleek silver ship appeared on their scanners, its design unmistakable. Ambassador Kell's voice came over the comms, calm but firm. "Commander Carter, we have been monitoring recent events. You are ordered to stand down and surrender immediately." Ethan clenched his jaw. After everything they had done, after all they had sacrificed, the Council still saw them as criminals. He glanced at Laura, who nodded slightly, giving him silent permission to take the lead. "We stopped the swarm," Ethan replied, his tone steady despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. "We did what you refused to do. If you want to arrest us, fine. But know this, humanity isn't going to sit back and wait for threats like the swarm to destroy us. We'll fight for our survival, whether you approve or not." There was a long pause before Kell responded. "Your actions will be reviewed. However, given the circumstances, the Council has decided to delay further action against you. For now, return to Elysium Prime and await further instructions." Ethan ended the transmission without another word. He didn't trust the Council's promises, but he knew arguing would only waste time. For now, they needed to regroup and figure out what came next. When they arrived back at Elysium Prime, the colony greeted them as heroes. News of their victory against the swarm had spread quickly, thanks to intercepted transmissions from the Council's ships. People cheered as Ethan and his team stepped off the ship, though the celebration felt bittersweet. Marcus and Rachel were gone, their sacrifices too fresh in everyone's minds. Later that evening, Ethan stood outside Fort Nova, watching the twin suns dip below the horizon. Laura joined him, holding Mia's hand. "Do you think it's over?" she asked softly. "I don't know," Ethan admitted. "But I do know one thing. Humanity proved something out there. We're more than just reckless warriors. We're survivors. And if the swarm, or anyone else, comes for us again, we'll be ready." As the stars began to twinkle above them, Ethan looked down at Mia, who smiled up at him innocently. In that moment, he realized why they had fought so hard. It wasn't just about stopping the swarm. It was about protecting moments like these, moments of peace, hope, and possibility. Whatever challenges lay ahead, humanity would face them together. The Galactic Council convened in a grand chamber, its walls shimmering with holographic displays of distant stars and planets. Representatives from dozens of alien species sat in silence as Ambassador Kell addressed the assembly. His voice was calm but carried an edge of unease. "Humanity has acted against our directives," he began, his pale blue skin glowing faintly under the soft light. "They have proven themselves reckless, unpredictable, and unwilling to follow the path of peace." Murmurs rippled through the room. Some council members nodded in agreement, while others exchanged skeptical glances. One representative, a tall insect-like being with glittering eyes, spoke up. "Reckless they may be, but their actions saved countless lives, including ours. The swarm is no longer a threat because of them." Cal's expression hardened. "Their defiance endangers the stability of the galaxy. If every species were allowed to act without restraint, chaos would reign." Another council member, a sleek aquatic creature encased in a hovering water-filled pod, chimed in. "Perhaps it is time we reconsider our stance on humanity. They are not mere warmongers. They are survivors. Their willingness to fight for what matters most. It is admirable, even if dangerous." Debate raged for hours, each side presenting arguments about humanity's role in the galaxy. In the end, the council reached a decision, not unanimously, but enough to pass the resolution. Humanity would no longer be banned from defending itself in times of crisis. However, strict oversight would remain in place to prevent further unauthorized actions. Back on Elysium Prime, life slowly returned to normal, or as close to normal as it could be after everything that had happened. Ethan Carter stood at the edge of Fort Nova, watching workers rebuild sections of the base damaged during earlier conflicts. Laura was nearby, helping Maya plant flowers in a small garden they had started together. It was a symbol of renewal, something beautiful rising from the ashes of loss. A message arrived from the council later that day. Ethan read it carefully, his face unreadable. When he finished, he called Laura over. "They've changed their stance," he said simply. "We're allowed to defend ourselves now, if necessary, but they'll still keep an eye on us." Laura smiled faintly. "It's not perfect, but it's progress." Ethan nodded, looking out at the horizon. Marcus and Rachel didn't die just so we could survive. They died so we could prove that humanity isn't defined by aggression alone. We're resourceful, brave, and willing to stand up for what's right, even when no one else will. As the days turned into weeks, stories of the team's bravery spread across human colonies and beyond. People began to see humanity not as reckless aggressors, but as determined protectors of their own future. Fort Nova became a symbol of hope, its rebuilt walls standing as a testament to resilience. One evening, Ethan took Mia outside to watch the stars. She pointed excitedly at the constellations, naming them as Laura had taught her. For a moment, Ethan forgot about the battles, the sacrifices, and the uncertainty ahead. All that mattered was the quiet joy of being alive, surrounded by those who mattered most. He knelt beside Mia and ruffled her hair gently. "You know," he said, his voice soft, "the galaxy can be a scary place sometimes. But there are good people, people like your mom, Marcus, and Rachel, who remind us why we keep fighting. And as long as we remember that, we'll be okay." Mia grinned up at him, her innocence untainted by the hardships she had witnessed. "We won, right?" Ethan smiled, though his eyes glistened with unused tears. "Yeah, kiddo, we won." As the twin suns rose above Elysium Prime the next morning, casting golden light across the land, Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose. Humanity's journey among the stars was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, he believed they truly had a chance. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as survivors, as fighters, and as dreamers daring to reach for the stars.